So, we're reading from My Face is Black is True. This is the story written by Mary Frances Berry. It's about Callie House and the struggle for ex-slave reparations. And so it shows a lot of documentation. I'm going to start reading. I've been reading this already, but I'm going to start reading from page 76. And this was the certificate for the Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association. So these were an association of black people seeking for reparations, ex-slaves, 300,000 people, The early certificate of ex-slave association does not mention mutual assistance. Basically, it was talking about a bill that Senator Mason bill had introduced. It would affiliate with the association so as to consolidate under one head. The Constitution and bylaws and the report of the convention included photographs of the officers, including Callie House. The membership certificates boasted a picture of Senator Mason of Illinois, and in one corner the words $500 bounty, the amount immediately payable in addition to $15 per month to those 70 or older if the bill passed. This is another document that she has in the book here. Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association. This is a letter that Mother Callie House put on. I guess that's the Instagram stuff. Sorry. Anyway. Miss Callie House, and this is the assistant, sent this letter to the Assistant Secretary National. She's the Assistant Secretary, National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association. So all the FBA, B1, ADOS, all the people seeking reparations, this is work that we need to build on. Go ahead and research her. And I'm going to read this letter here if I can get to it. It says, "Dear friends, I have been a promoter of the ex-slave bill and an advocate of the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association for the past 25 months. I have been among strangers laboring to the best of my ability for the rights which my race is justly entitled to. It is my firm belief that honest labor should be rewarded, regardless of the color of the man or woman who performed that labor. I am in favor of the principles embodied in the so-called Mason bill because they are just and should the bill receive because they are just and should receive the consideration it richly merits. It will, in my opinion, be but a question of time when those of our race who have borne the burden and beat of the day will receive some recompense for honest labor performed during the dark and latter days of slavery. Let us consolidate all ex-slave organizations. So there was more than one. Let us consolidate all ex-slave organizations and bring it to bear upon the lawmakers of the country which we labored so long and well to develop every degree of influence within our power. Very truly, Callie House. So this is our mother telling us to go ahead and get busy making these folks pay. They need to pay. What's going on? What's going on, family? What's happening? All right, I'm just going to read a little bit more of this. This is history, and we need to read this. And actually, listening to this reminds me of Sister Figgy Dillard, a little bit of this sister's life. But remember, the certificate did not explicitly reiterate the language in the charter concerning the mutual benefit mission, but spoke only of efforts to aid the ex-slave movement and raise funds to promote the passage of the bill. National African American newspapers and leading politicians and activists did not change their views concerning pensions just because the efforts became black-led and successful, while the white press derided the movement as ridiculous and fraudulent. These leading African Americans either ignored it or criticized it as a distraction from the struggle for political rights and a hopeless cause. House often expressed outrage at their refusal to provide publicity that would help to organize the movement. These leaders' efforts to gain land and education aid and even election protection in the Congress had failed miserably. Yet they would not even try another avenue for relief for poor black people. From her perspective, the most learned Negroes have less interest in their race than any other Negro, as many of them are fighting against the welfare of their race. Despite these divisions between better off, better educated African Americans and the poor free people who supported pensions, the association had organized successfully and was rapidly growing. The fees it collected, House explained, paid expenses of the movement in printing literature and postage on literature sent out to notify our conventions and meeting for speaking and to pay traveling expenses. Support men and women who are giving their whole time to the movement. The association also spent the funds to send men to Congress as delegates to present our petition when Congress meets the first Monday in December. In addition to the local chapters used the 10 cents monthly dues they collected to pay for places to meet and to help old and decrepit members to render mutual assistance any way they see fit. Callie House expressed pride in the convention's works as she circulated the minutes to the membership. She was especially honored that she had been elected by the people as an officer in this organization, which belongs to the people and not to the officers. She was proud that the old ex-slaves were helping one another locally. She also was excited that ex-slaves were exercising their citizenship rights to gain a new law at a time when disenfranchisement had closed other avenues for political action. The association was off to a promising start. Yep. Black folks before welfare were helping each other. All right? So the association under attack. The ex-slave pension movement is setting the Negroes wild, making anarchists of them. And this is Pension Bureau Inspector W.L. Reed, 1899. So that government was already trying to squash the black ex-slave reparations movement from the actual ex-slaves. Ecstatic over her election as Assistant Secretary, Callie House left the convention determined to continue the rapid expansion of the ex-slave pension movement. In the midst of her joy, she received a letter from Harrison Barrett, Acting Assistant Attorney General of the Post Office Department in Washington, D.C. Reading the letter, House sensed danger to the very existence of the movement. Barrett notified her that he was issuing an order denying the association the use of mails because it supposedly engaged in fraud. The association, like other organizations, was almost absolutely dependent on using the post office to correspond with members and to transact financial affairs. The people's commitment was the lifeblood of the organization, but the mails were crucial means of communication and support. House and the other officers traveled constantly, but they could not be everywhere at once. They traveled by train and by horse and carriage, sometimes walking for miles in the country. Besides, traveling was costly, arduous, and slow, especially in the rural communities where many of the chapters developed. She did not know it at the time, but Barrett had sent the same letter to other association officers and to Dickerson. I.H. Dickerson was the general manager. House knew from Dickerson that the Pension Bureau had investigated Vaughn's clubs at the behest of whites who wrote in to complain about the idea. She also knew that Vaughn had denounced others in the movement and stopped organizing. And Vaughn was the white man who first put out the idea of pensions because he wanted to make sure that the old white people who was the slave masters would have customers, and the customers he wanted to have money, which were the old black people who were the ex-slaves. So she knew that Vaughn had denounced others in the movement and stopped organizing, but she did not know the extent of the interest the association's activities had aroused within the federal government. When House and Dickerson began organizing the association, federal inspectors continued their monitoring of the ex-slave pension advocates. Inspectors consistently wrote in their reports that they found nothing illegal in organizing a lobbying group for the government could not prosecute the pension-seeking leaders unless they claimed to be federal officials, and no evidence had been found of that. The Bureau sent Special Examiner William Baird to a local pension meeting in Chattanooga, and he reported seeing nothing misleading. The organizer to whom he spoke explained that the membership fee of 25 cents paid expenses of agitation for legislation. The 10 cents a month dues paid for a hall, lights, maintenance, and publications. The association enrolled at least 34,000 members between July 1897 and April 1899, and those thereafter. House had no idea that Bureau officials had stepped up their surveillance. Because the association's rapid growth, the Bureau sent letters to ministers and others who acted as association agents, warning them of complaints of fraud. The letters told individuals who collected small amounts of money from the ex-slaves dupes. He called them dupes, man. To put their names on a pension list. The letters asked that they report anyone who traveled throughout the southern states, representing that the pension bill had become law, that various sums had been appropriated to pay the pensions thereunder, and that they were officers of the government of the United States, fully authorized and empowered to cause the names of these ex-slaves to be inscribed upon the pension rolls. The letters heavy-handed warnings that those who engaged in such representations could suffer punishment of a fine of not more than $1,000 and imprisonment of no longer than 3 years or both. The letters routinely pointed out that the government did not mean to interfere with the right to seek pensions, since citizens had an unquestioned right to associate, to lobby for legislation. But this disclaimer did not lessen the intentionally chilling effect the notice had on the organizers. After the ex-slave Association's Charter Convention in 1898 and the continued development of local chapters, the suspicion of their organizations grew. House saw African Americans as victims and the federal government as an accomplice in their subordinate and impoverishment. Now, in contrast, Barrett's letter indicated that government officials defined blacks as ignorant victims of the ex-slave pension movement. Moreover, the ignorant were also seen by the government as capable of dangerous rebellion. In May 1899, Pension Bureau Inspector W.L. Reed told his superiors that the ex-slave pension movement is setting the Negroes wild, robbing them of their money, making anarchists of them. If this continues, the government will have some very serious questions to settle in connection with the control of the race. House was totally oblivious to the possibility that the post office department would interfere with their efforts to gain pensions. If she had known about the evolution of the postal authority and enforcement of activities, Barrett's letter would not have been such a surprise. Essentially, Pension Bureau officials had decided to have the Postmaster General use his anti-fraud powers to suppress the association. They assumed that cutting off the mails would strike a death blow to the movement. The federal government targeted the ex-slave pension cause as threatening enough for deployment of law enforcement resources, while at the same time the federal government remained generally unreceptive to blacks' complaints of disenfranchisement, racially motivated assault, and even lynchings carried out with the cooperation of local and state authorities. In this general attitude of neglect of black concerns about safety and eroding citizenship rights, political officials in 3 agencies, the Justice Department and the Post Office Department, at the behest of the Pension Bureau, decided to declare war on the association. Acting Assistant Attorney General Harrison Barrett rationalized their actions by explaining that House and her colleagues knew that there had never been the remotest prospect that Congress would appropriate pensions for African Americans. Of course, pension legislation had repeatedly been introduced in Congress. Further, often in the legislative process, proposals are made for years before public education and circumstances make passage possible. The income tax followed a similar path successfully until legislation and then a constitutional amendment was enacted. The impoverished ex-slave might presumably take longer and need more tenacity to achieve an objective than better endowed groups. Barrett and the other officials registered their distaste at the temerity of Callie House and the others in acting uncontrolled by whites. They didn't like them acting on their own. They're slaves. They're not waiting for us to tell them what to do. So they're not having fun by black people being uncontrolled by whites and asserting their independence and commitment. Federal officials feared the association's successful membership campaigns, mobilizing so many freed people, heightened the danger of rebellion by wild African Americans. When freedom's first generation discovered that there would be no pensions or other compensation for slavery, as a result, federal officials kept close surveillance on the association's rapidly growing membership and put politically appointed local postmasters on the front lines of the attack. The commitment of A.W. Wills, the postmaster in Nashville, where the association maintained its headquarters, was key. Arriving in Nashville from Philadelphia after the Civil War, he practiced law and was a claims agent before obtaining a political appointment as postmaster in 1890. A loyal Republican, he served as a delegate to the National Convention in 1900 that selected the Williams McKinney Theodore Roosevelt ticket. He was eager to implement the harassment policy ordered against the association. House and the association had become targets of a law enforcement process that had been developed for reasons totally unrelated to black activism. Fraudulent use of the U.S. mails to provoke sin and commercial scams became a matter of great concern in the nation toward the end of the 19th century, leading to the exercise of extraordinary power by the Postmaster General in controlling the use of the mails. This power had developed only gradually, but eventually the Postmaster had the ability to suppress valid freedom of expression, such as lobbying and petitioning exercised by ex-slave association. The Constitution permits Congress to relegate post offices and the mails. Before the Civil War, Congress excluded from handling only matter that weighted more than 3 or 4 pounds during the Civil War. So basically, the postmaster is pretty much like the internet right now. And I think we'll read one more page here. The Postmaster General exercised the power to ban material that might be considered treasonable or might give aid to the enemy. Congress had upheld the postmaster's actions while recognizing that they had the right to instruct him to declare certain matter unmailable. Extending the principle after the war, Congress established categories of unmailable matter. The gradual expansion of the postmaster's powers continued as Congress first focused on making obscenity unmailable. In an 1865 law that excluded from the mails any obscene book, pamphlet, picture, print, or other publication of vulgar and indecent character. Congress repeated this provision in an 1872 codification of the postal laws and extended it in the 1873 Comstock Law, passed at the behest of New York Young Men's Christian Association Committee for the Suppression of Vice, which had begun campaigning against obscene literature. The YMCA hired Anthony Comstock to fight the trafficking in obscene literature. Comstock, an impecunious dry goods salesman, said that religious fervor and the loss of a friend who had succumbed to sexual excess, supposedly caused by reading erotic publications, stimulated his interest in the issue. The Comstock Law expanded the obscenity category to include birth control information, appliances, and masturbatory materials, and permitted search and seizure. Comstock served until his death in 1915 as both a special agent of the Post Office and secretary of the Society for the Suppression of Vice in New York. Working under New York state and federal law that the New York YMCA had sponsored, he had the power to arrest violators and seize their material. And I think I will stop right there, guys. We're just going to stop there. I do also read on the little YouTube channel. I don't know why I put this on, but whatever. Peace, guys. Thanks for looking at the live. And, Callie House, FBA, Reparations, My Face is Black is True. This is what we're going to keep reading on. But also you can go to Super Mike 2164 on YouTube, and the B1 Math, Science, and History channel. And I have some of the earlier readings on there. All right, peace.